You don't need that money, Mom. You're almost 70. What are you saving it for? Those words hit me harder than any slap could. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the tone, the calm, entitled voice of my only son, Rick, standing in my kitchen as if it still belonged to him. In that moment, I realized I had spent my whole life serving the men I loved first, my husband, now my son, pouring coffee, handing over checks, offering pieces of myself until there was almost nothing left. My heart felt like an old house with lights still on inside, but no one living there anymore. Maybe you've heard something like that too. A loved one who crosses the line, who uses love as leverage. If you've ever had to choose between protecting someone else and protecting yourself, stay with me. This story is for you. My name is Helen Morales. I live alone in a quiet suburb outside Dallas, Texas, 10 years a widow, with a house paid off and a lifetime of regrets stacked in drawers like old bills. My son Rick is a businessman, charming, impatient, always chasing something bigger. That morning he came unannounced, a leather folder in his hand, his phone in the other, and a look that told me whatever he wanted, it wasn't good. When I opened the door, I already knew trouble had found me again. I just didn't know it would be the day I finally decided to stop being the woman everyone could take from. The morning started like any other. The house was quiet, still holding the chill of dawn. I had just poured myself a cup of coffee when the first knock came. 3 hard raps against the front door, sharp, urgent. I froze, the spoon halfway to the sugar bowl. Few people ever knocked on my door that early. The sound echoed through the narrow hallway, bouncing off framed photos of people who had already taken more from me than they ever gave. I knew that knock. "Rick?" I whispered to no one. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home. Maybe he would leave, maybe he'd think I was out for groceries or still asleep. But I knew better. My son was never the kind to wait or to be ignored. Patience wasn't in his blood. Not in his father's either. The knocking came again, faster this time. I took a deep breath, placed my coffee on the counter, and walked toward the door. The floor creaked beneath my slippers. Through the small window beside the door, I could see his car parked in the driveway, a black Escalade, shining as if it had never seen a day of hardship. It was parked diagonally, blocking the sidewalk. Typical Rick. Always taking up more space than he should. When I opened the door, the morning light fell across his face. He looked older, sharper somehow. His hair was slicked back, his suit too expensive for someone who was supposedly in between deals. His phone was in one hand, a brown envelope in the other. "Morning, Mom," he said, stepping past me without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." Not even a hug, not even eye contact, just business. As always, I followed him into the kitchen. He sat at the table, my table, as if he still lived there. He set the envelope down and began scrolling through his phone with his thumb. "Coffee would be great," he murmured, still staring at the screen. Without thinking, I reached for another cup. 10 years a widow, and I was still serving the men in my life like it was the only thing I knew how to do. The smell of coffee filled the room as I poured and placed it in front of him. He didn't even look up. "Thanks," he muttered. I sat across from him, feeling a dull ache in my chest. His hands were tense, knuckles white as he typed. "Is Amanda okay?" I asked, trying to break the silence. "And the kids? Luke and Mary?" "They're fine," he said flatly. "This isn't about them." Then he put the phone down and finally looked at me. His eyes were cold, his father's eyes. "I'll get straight to the point. We've got a problem." That word used to mean something. It used to mean family, togetherness, love. Now it meant obligation. It meant that I was about to lose something else. He pushed the envelope toward me. "Amanda made some investments. Things didn't go as planned. We need to fix it before it gets ugly." I opened the envelope carefully, my fingers trembling. Inside were pages of printed statements, overdue notices, contracts, and a loan agreement with one number circled in red. $300,000. My throat went dry. "Rick, this is your entire business," I whispered. This is everything I have left." He took a sip of his coffee, eyes still on me. "Mom, come on, it's not like you need it. You live here alone, the house is paid off, your bills are minimal. You're 68. What are you holding on to it for?" The words pierced me clean through. Not because he was wrong, but because of how easily he said it. Like my life, My years, my sacrifices, none of it mattered anymore. This house, I said quietly, is all I have, Rick. It's my home. It's my security. He leaned forward, his voice firm but coated with false patience. Amanda got scammed. If we don't pay, things could get dangerous. These aren't bankers, Mom. They're not the kind of people who wait. What kind of people? He shook his head. You don't need to know that. Just trust me. I'll pay you back as soon as the company stabilizes. I looked at him, at the man who used to be my little boy, and for the first time, I couldn't recognize him. The way his jaw tightened, the way his tone demanded instead of asked. It wasn't desperation. It was control. You've borrowed before, I said, my voice trembling. 50,000 for the expansion, then another 100,000. You never paid those back. He exhaled, frustrated. This isn't the time for guilt trips. I'm your son. You said you'd always be there for me. You meant that, right? My chest tightened. There it was, the familiar manipulation, the echo of my late husband's voice hiding inside my son's. I looked around the kitchen, the faded curtains, the small vase of lilies I kept alive out of stubbornness. The house felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were listening. I need to think, I whispered. There's no time to think, he snapped. I need that money wired today. By tonight it'll be too late. He stood up, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal, running his hand through his hair. Mom, please, he said, softer now, placing both hands on my shoulders. It's for Amanda, for the kids, for our family. Family. That word used to save me. Now it was a chain. I wanted to scream, to tell him that I had given enough, that I deserved to keep what little peace I had. But I couldn't. My mouth betrayed me, as it always had. Fine, I said finally. I'll transfer it. Relief washed over his face. For a brief second, I saw a flicker of the boy he once was. He kissed my forehead quickly. Thanks, Mom. I knew I could count on you. Etienne. Then he grabbed his folder, checked his watch, and walked to the door. I've got a meeting. I'll come back tonight for dinner. We'll settle everything then, okay? I nodded, unable to speak. As the door closed, I heard his car engine roar. Gravel scattered across the driveway, tearing into the flower bed I'd tended the night before. The silence that followed was heavy. I sat back down at the table and stared at the coffee cup he'd left half full, a dark ring staining the edge of the porcelain. My hands were shaking. I looked at the papers spread across the table, numbers, debts, lies, and I realized that my life had come full circle. First Edward, now Rick. 2 men, same story. I reached for my cup and took a slow sip, the bitterness burning my tongue. The house around me felt hollow, like the echo of something once beautiful. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the old trees in the yard. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe, but my chest felt heavy. Something inside me, something small and buried for decades, began to stir. Maybe anger, maybe courage, maybe both. By the time the clock struck noon, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep living this way. But I also knew that tonight, when Rick returned expecting dinner and another check, I would have to decide what kind of woman I truly was, the one who always obeyed, or the one who finally walked away. By the time the sun dipped below the trees, the house had turned into a quiet battlefield. My hands were trembling as I stared at the computer screen. One click, that was all it would take. One transfer and every cent of my life's savings would belong to someone else again. I hesitated. The cursor blinked at me like a heartbeat, slow and steady, daring me to do it. For 68 years, I had been obedient. For 68 years, my peace came from keeping others comfortable. Maybe that was why my chest ached now, like I was watching myself drown one more time. Rick's words still rang in my head. Don't disappoint me, Mom. End quote. He used to say that as a child, when I forgot to pick him up from soccer practice, or when dinner wasn't ready on time. Back then, it was harmless. But somewhere along the way, those same words turned into shackles. I shut the laptop. My reflection on the dark screen looked tired, almost ghost-like. The phone rang, breaking the silence. I didn't have to look to know who it was. Rick. I let it ring until it stopped. Then it rang again. Finally, I picked up. Yes, Rick? Hey, did you make the transfer? His voice was casual, confident, like he already knew the answer. Not yet, I said. He sighed, loud enough to sting. Mom, You promised. You can't back out now. It's noted. I said I would think about it. Think about it? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. We don't have time for that. You have no idea what's at stake. No, I do, I said quietly. I know exactly what's at stake. For a moment, there was silence on the line. Then his voice softened, slippery. Mom, I love you. I'm just trying to fix this. You always said family comes first. Yes, I said, feeling tears rise. And maybe that's been my mistake all along. When the call ended, I sat still for a long time. The sun had vanished completely, leaving the kitchen wrapped in a dull orange glow. Every object in that room carried a story. The teapot I got for my wedding, the chair where Rick did his homework, the tiny crack in the wall Edward never fixed. They were pieces of a life built around other people, never me. That realization hit me with such clarity that I felt dizzy. I stood up, walked to the window, and saw my reflection staring back. A woman who had given everything. A woman who had nothing left to lose. I picked up the phone and called a number I hadn't dialed in years. Marilyn Carter speaking, a familiar voice answered. Marilyn, I said, my voice breaking. It's Helen. I need your help. The scribe did you eat. Within 2 hours, the doorbell rang again, this time gentle, measured, kind. Marilyn stepped inside like a gust of sanity. Her gray hair was tied back, her glasses perched on her nose, her expression sharp as ever. She took one look at me and frowned. Tell me what he did. Over cups of tea, I told her everything. The debt, the manipulation, the years of guilt. She listened without interrupting, but I could see her jaw tighten. When I finished, she set her cup down firmly. That's insane, Helen. $300,000. Are you out of your mind? I know, I whispered. But he's my son. Marilyn shook her head. You are his mother, not his wallet. Edward trained you to think your worth came from sacrifice, and now Rick's just continuing the tradition. Her words cut deep, but they were true. So what do? I asked. Marilyn leaned forward. You take back your life, all of it. First, we move your money, every cent. We put it somewhere safe, somewhere he can't touch. Then, you leave, tonight. Leave? I repeated, startled. Yes, she said. Pack what matters and walk away. He'll come back expecting a check and dinner. Instead, he'll find an empty house. Her tone was firm, almost gleeful. I wanted to protest, but the idea, the image of him standing in this same kitchen and finding nothing, filled me with a kind of power I hadn't felt in years. I can't, I said, though my heart whispered, you must. Yes, you can. You've been surviving everyone else's choices for decades. Now it's time to make one of your own. I stared at the tea swirling in my cup. He'll hate me. He already does, Marilyn said softly. He just hides it behind the word love. The words settled in the room like smoke. I looked up at her and, for the first time in years, felt something other than fear. Determination. Marilyn smiled. That's the look I remember from college. End quote. That night, while she made calls to the bank and her attorney friend, I packed. Not much. A few clothes, my medication, my passport, a photo of my mother. I left behind the framed picture of Rick as a child. That version of him was gone, and I didn't need the reminder. When I opened my jewelry box, I found a small envelope of cash I had hidden years ago, money I'd saved secretly from selling baked goods at church events, my little rebellion. I smiled as I tucked it into my bag. By 10 p.m., everything was ready. The house looked eerily calm, the way it always did before a storm. Marilyn handed me a pen and a sheet of paper. You should leave him a note. Closure, not explanation. It's Tam. I stared at the blank page. What could I possibly say to a man who had taken so much from me? After a moment, I wrote slowly. The one who disappoints you is me. Goodbye. I placed the note on the kitchen table beside his half-empty coffee cup and walked toward the front door. The air outside was cool, the sky moonlit. Marilyn's car waited in the driveway. I took one last look at the house, the same walls that had witnessed my silence, my fear, my surrender, and closed the door behind me. As we drove away, the city lights faded in the rear-view mirror. My heart raced, torn between panic and relief. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running to help someone else. I was running for myself. Marilyn reached over and squeezed my hand. You okay? I looked out the window at the dark highway ahead. "Not yet," I said. "But I will be." We drove in silence for a while before she spoke again. "You know, Helen, you're doing what most women never get to do. You're saving yourself." Her words lingered in the air like a quiet anthem. I watched the horizon, wondering if freedom would feel like guilt or peace when it finally settled in. Somewhere between Dallas and San Diego, as the night stretched endlessly before us, I realized something simple and terrifying. Rick would wake up tomorrow to a world where I no longer existed the way he knew me, and for the first time, I smiled. Have you ever reached a point where you realize someone you love has been taking from you more than they give? Would you have done what Helen did, walk away from your own child to finally be free? If you agree with her choice, comment how old you are or where you're watching from to show your support. If you think family should always come first, no matter what, hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe, the next chapter only gets more intense. The first morning in San Diego felt unreal. The air smelled like salt and new beginnings. Waves broke gently in the distance, their rhythm calm and steady, like a heartbeat I could finally hear again. I stood on the small balcony of Marilyn's beach apartment, holding a mug of coffee and watching the sun climb above the water. For the first time in decades, there was no one to serve but myself. Marilyn had left early for her law office downtown. Even in semi-retirement, she still helped a few clients, mostly women like me, women learning to live after being controlled for too long. She had insisted I stay as long as I needed. "Consider this a layover before freedom," she said. I didn't understand what she meant until now. That morning, I walked to the local market. The air was crisp, and the streets were full of people who looked alive in ways I hadn't felt in years. I bought a small basket of strawberries and a notebook, thinking maybe it was time to start writing again. Not about the past, but about what might still be ahead. Back at the apartment, I received the first call. Rick. His name lit up the screen, followed by a wave of nausea that tightened my stomach. I let it ring. Then again, and again. I turned off the phone and placed it inside a drawer. The silence that followed felt both terrifying and peaceful. For years, I had mistaken silence for loneliness. Now it felt like breathing. By afternoon, I decided to go for a walk along the beach. Children were building sandcastles, dogs chased after frisbees, and couples strolled hand in hand. I envied them their ease, their simplicity, but I also knew appearances could lie. I used to look that way once too, years ago beside Edward, the picture-perfect family hiding all its cracks. That night, Marilyn came home carrying takeout from a seafood place. She handed me a glass of white wine and studied my face. "You look lighter," she said. "I turned off my phone," I replied. She smiled knowingly. Ah, the modern form of liberation. 1. We ate in silence for a while, listening to the sound of the ocean. Then she asked, "Are you planning to call him?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "He's probably furious." Marilyn put her fork down. "Let him be. Fury is easier for him than guilt, but make no mistake, Helen, he'll come looking for you." I nodded. Somewhere deep down, I knew she was right. The next morning proved it. When I turned on my phone to check the time, it was flooded with missed calls and messages. Some were pleading, some were angry. "Mom, please call me. You can't just disappear like this. You have no idea what you're doing. The house is in my name, remember?" Each one felt like a stone thrown against a window I was no longer standing behind. Later that week, Marilyn introduced me to a friend who owned a small craft booth at a local market. "You used to sew, right?" she asked. "They're looking for someone who can make embroidered pieces." The idea scared me at first. I hadn't worked in decades. My identity had always been tied to other people, to being Edward's wife, Rick's mother. I wasn't sure who I was without those titles. But one morning, I gathered the courage to try. I stitched my first small design, a rose, pale pink on white linen. The petals were uneven, but it felt good. My hands, though old and shaky, still remembered beauty. Within a week, I was selling simple embroidered napkins and homemade cookies. It wasn't much, but each sale felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Then, one afternoon, as I was setting up the booth, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mrs. Morales?" "This is Detective Olivia Grant from the Dallas Police Department." My heart stopped. "Is it Rick?" "Yes," she said gently. Your son is currently under investigation for financial fraud and forgery. We'd like to ask you some questions." I sat down hard on the nearest bench. "Fraud? Forgery? I don't understand." "Mrs. Morales, were you aware that several bank accounts are registered in your name?" "I do have expense." I felt dizzy. "No," I whispered. "He must have, oh God. We believe he's been using your identity for financial transactions," the detective continued. "You may not be legally responsible, but your statement could help us close the case." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I had always known Rick bent the rules, but this was theft. When I finally found my voice, it was trembling. "Do what you need to do, detective. I'll cooperate fully." After the call ended, I just sat there, staring at the waves crashing endlessly. I should have felt relief, maybe even vindication, but what I felt most was grief. Grief for the boy he used to be, for the mother I used to be. That night, I told Marilyn everything. She listened quietly, her face unreadable. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "He's not a child anymore, Helen. You can't save him, but you can save yourself." Her words settled deep inside me, like the calm after a storm. Over the next few days, I met with Detective Grant through video calls. She was professional but kind. She told me that Rick's company was collapsing, that he had lied to multiple investors, and that his debts were tied to people you wouldn't want to cross. When I hung up, I walked out to the balcony and watched the sunset. The sky was painted in orange and violet, the colors blending like forgiveness and regret. I knew I was safe. For now. But I also knew that nothing would ever be the same again. That night, before bed, I opened the notebook I had bought at the market. On the first page, I wrote, "Day 10 of freedom. I am scared. I am strong. Both can be true." The next morning, a small package arrived at Marilyn's door. There was no return address, but I knew immediately who it was from. Inside was a photograph, Rick with Amanda and the kids, smiling. On the back, he had written in shaky handwriting, "Mom, please come home. We can fix this." For a long time, I held that photo in my hands, my heart torn between love and exhaustion. Then I folded it gently and tucked it into the back of my notebook. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I wasn't ready to hate either. I stood at the window as the first rays of morning lit the water. The city was waking up, and so was I. Somewhere in Dallas, Rick's world was falling apart. But here in San Diego, for the first time in my life, mine was just beginning. And yet, even as peace started to take root, I knew the storm wasn't over. Because people like Rick, people raised to believe love was control, don't give up easily, and neither would I. Detective Olivia Grant arrived in San Diego on a gray afternoon, the kind where the ocean looked more like steel than water. I met her at a small cafe by the pier that Marilyn had chosen for privacy. She was younger than I expected. Maybe in her late 30s, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun. Her voice was calm but carried a weight of experience. "Mrs. Morales," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "Thank you for meeting with me. I know this can't be easy." Easy. Nothing about this was easy. My son was under investigation for financial fraud, forgery, and God knows what else. And now the law was asking me, his mother, to help them prove it. We sat by the window, the ocean in view. Olivia opened a file and laid out several documents. "These accounts were opened under your name," she explained, pointing to the pages. "Some were used to move money connected to Rick's company. Did you authorize any of this?" I studied the papers. My name was there, neatly printed beside signatures that looked like mine almost. "No," I said quietly. "I never saw these before." Olivia nodded, taking notes. "We suspected as much. It seems your son forged your signature on multiple forms. That makes you a victim, not an accomplice." The word victim sat heavy in the air. I'd been one for most of my life, but hearing it said out loud by someone in authority made it feel real, undeniable. "I thought I was done being used," I said, my voice barely audible. Olivia looked at me kindly. "It's not your fault, Mrs. Morales. Some people manipulate those closest to them because they know they can." Her words cut through me. Edward had done it for years, with a smile and a gentle hand. Rick had learned from the best. She asked more questions. When was the last time I spoke to him? If I'd noticed strange mail? If he'd asked me to sign anything? I answered carefully, piecing together the puzzle of my own blindness. When the interview was done, Olivia closed her file. "We'll likely need you to give a formal statement soon. Are you safe here in San Diego?" I hesitated. "I think so. My friend Marilyn has been helping me." "Good," she said. "Because, given the people your son's involved with, I'd strongly advise you not to return to Texas for the time being." I nodded, though the warning chilled me. My son wasn't just careless, he was dangerous by association. After she left, I sat by the pier for a long time. The waves were rough, angry. I couldn't stop thinking about Rick, about the little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees, crying for comfort. How had that child become a man who forged his own mother's name? That night, I told Marilyn everything. She poured 2 glasses of wine and listened without interrupting. When I finished, she shook her head slowly. "He's gone too far this time, Helen. You can't save him." "I don't want to save him," I said. "I just want to understand." "Understand what?" she asked gently. "How love can turn into this," I whispered. Marilyn reached over and took my hand. "Love doesn't turn into this. Control does, and you were trained to confuse the two." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I thought of all the times Edward had said he knew best, all the times Rick had demanded in the same tone, generation after generation, the same story repeating itself. The next few days passed in slow motion. Detective Grant called twice, updating me about the case. Rick's company had officially filed for bankruptcy. Investors were furious. His employees had quit, and worst of all, some of the debts were tied to loan sharks. Amanda called me one evening. I almost didn't pick up. When I did, her voice was trembling. "Helen," she said, "I don't know what to do. Rick's changed. He's angry all the time. He's drinking. The kids are scared." "Where are you now?" I asked. "At home. He's out. I think he's meeting someone about the money." "Listen to me," I said firmly. "Take Luke and Mary and go to your parents, tonight." "I can't," she whispered. "He controls everything, the accounts, the car, even my phone." As of Rand, her fear was like a mirror reflecting my own from decades ago. I lowered my voice. "Amanda, I'll help you, but you have to trust me. When he leaves again, pack what you can and call this number." I gave her Marilyn's contact and an address for a women's shelter Marilyn often worked with. After we hung up, I felt the weight of every choice I had ever made pressing down on me. The cycle was repeating not just with me and Rick, but with Rick and his wife. Another woman trapped by the illusion of love. Later that night, Marilyn found me sitting on the balcony, staring at the waves. "You're planning something," she said. "I just want them safe." I replied. "Be careful," she warned. "Rick's desperate. Desperate people do stupid things." "I know," I said. "I lived with one." Over the next week, the situation unraveled faster than I could process. Rick called from unknown numbers, alternating between rage and pleading. One message said, "Mom, I can fix this if you just help me one more time." Another said, "If you don't answer, you'll regret it." I showed everything to Detective Grant. She told me they were building a strong case. "We have enough evidence to make an arrest soon," she said. The word arrest made my stomach twist. No mother ever wants to hear it about her child, even when she knows it's deserved. 2 nights later, I received a message from Amanda again. "We're safe," it read. "At my parents' house. Thank you." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. The next morning, the phone rang again. It was Detective Grant. "Mrs. Morales, your son's been detained for questioning." I didn't know what to feel: relief, sorrow, or shame. Maybe all three. When the call ended, I stood by the window, watching the sunrise bleed across the water. It was beautiful and painful all at once, like every ending worth surviving. Marilyn joined me a few minutes later with 2 cups of coffee. "Well," she said softly, "it's happening." "Yes," I replied. "It is." She placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've done the hardest part already. You chose yourself." And well, I nodded, though my heart felt heavy. "I just wish it didn't have to be this way." Marilyn looked out toward the sea. "It always has to be this way before it gets better." We stood there in silence, the sound of the waves filling the room. I thought of Rick sitting in some cold interrogation room, still believing he could talk his way out of anything. For years, I'd been the one he manipulated. Now, it would have to be someone else. But deep inside, I knew the story wasn't over. People like Rick don't surrender easily. The reckoning had just begun, and I had no idea what he would do when he realized his mother was the one who helped bring him down. The call came early in the morning. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I woke to Marilyn's voice on the other end. "It's done," she said softly. "They arrested him last night." For a moment, I didn't say anything. The words hung in the air like fog. My heart started to race, but not from surprise. I had been expecting this, dreading it, maybe even praying for it. "Is he okay?" I asked finally. "As okay as someone in handcuffs can be," she said. "Detective Grant called me after it happened. They're holding him for questioning. Fraud, forgery, multiple charges. It's serious, Helen." I sat up slowly, my hands trembling. I felt no relief, only a strange emptiness. I had known this day would come, but I never imagined it would feel like morning. Later that morning, Detective Grant called me herself. "Mrs. Morales," she said, her tone formal but gentle. "Your son was taken into custody without incident. He'll be arraigned tomorrow." "I see. I know this is painful, but your cooperation was crucial. You helped us stop something that could have gotten much worse." "Detective," I said, my voice catching, "will he go to prison?" "It's too soon to tell, but given the evidence, it's likely." After we hung up, I stayed in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling. The light filtering through the curtains felt harsh. The sound of the waves outside, once comforting, now seemed too loud. My son was sitting in a cell, and part of me wanted to run to him, to tell him everything would be all right even if it was a lie. But another part of me whispered that maybe, for once, this was justice. That afternoon, Marilyn drove me to the courthouse. She didn't ask if I wanted to go, she just knew I needed to. We parked a few blocks away and walked in silence. The building was cold, gray, and echoing. Inside, people hurried past, carrying files, whispering in corridors. When I saw Rick, my breath caught. He was standing between two officers, his hands cuffed, wearing the same expensive suit he'd worn the day he came to my house. Only now it looked too big, as if it belonged to someone else. His eyes found mine instantly. "Mom," he said, his voice low but desperate. I couldn't speak. My knees felt weak. One of the officers stepped between us, but Rick raised his voice slightly. "You did this. You told them." I looked at him, really looked at him. There was anger in his face, but behind it, fear. The same fear I'd seen in Edward's eyes the night he lost everything. The same fear that turns love into blame. "I told the truth," I said quietly. His expression hardened. "You think this makes you free? It doesn't. You'll see." The officer pulled him away before he could say more. I stood there frozen, my heart pounding. Marilyn took my arm gently. "Come on," she whispered. "You don't owe him anything more." We left the courthouse and drove home in silence. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gold. I felt hollowed out. That night, I sat on the balcony, watching the last light fade from the ocean. I thought about all the years I'd spent protecting him, the scraped knees, the late-night phone calls, the endless excuses. Every mother thinks her love can fix what's broken in her child. But sometimes, love just hides the cracks until they're too wide to repair. Marilyn joined me with a cup of tea. "You did the right thing," she said. "I know," I replied, "but knowing doesn't make it easier." She nodded. "It's not supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be right." The next day, the newspapers ran the story. Local businessman arrested for fraud and forgery. His photo was everywhere, Rick being escorted by police, his head bowed, his face blank. The comments online were cruel. Strangers speculated about his greed, his downfall. Some even mentioned me by name, calling me the mother who turned him in. I tried not to read them, but curiosity got the better of me. That night, I received a call from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Mom," the voice said. "It was him. They let me make one call." I closed my eyes. "Rick, you shouldn't be calling me." "I just needed to hear your voice," he said. "I can fix this. I just need your help one more time." My throat tightened. "No, Rick, not this time." He went quiet. When he spoke again, his voice was darker. "You think they'll protect you? They won't. None of them will. You betrayed your own son." "I protected myself," I said softly. something I should have done a long time ago. There was a pause. Then he said coldly, "You'll regret this." The line went dead. I sat there, gripping the phone, trying to steady my breathing. Marilyn found me minutes later and took it from my hand. "He can't hurt you," she said. "Not anymore." But deep down, I wasn't sure. Because hurt doesn't always come from what people do sometimes, it comes from what they've already done to your heart. The following week, I received a letter from the court. I was being called to testify at his arraignment as a witness. My stomach turned when I saw my name printed next to state witness. It felt surreal. My entire life had been about protecting Rick. Now I was being asked to help prove his guilt. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I walked to the edge of the beach and stood barefoot in the sand. The waves rolled in quietly, brushing against my feet like a whisper from something ancient and patient. I thought about forgiveness, not the kind that absolves, but the kind that releases. Maybe this was what that looked like. Maybe forgiveness wasn't saying, "It's okay." Maybe it was finally saying, "It's not." The next morning, as Marilyn and I drove to the courthouse again, I felt strangely calm. I wasn't the same woman who had once handed over her savings without question. I was someone new, fragile still, but whole. When I entered the courtroom, Rick was already there. He looked smaller than before, pale and tired. For a brief moment, our eyes met again. I wanted to find the boy I used to know, the one who used to hug me after nightmares, who once believed I could fix everything. But he was gone. The judge called the room to order. I raised my hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. When the prosecutor began asking questions, my voice didn't shake. I told them about the money, the manipulation, the years of emotional blackmail. I told them how he forged my signature. Each word felt like another layer of fog lifting from my life. When it was over, I stepped down from the stand. My legs were unsteady, but my heart felt lighter. As I walked out of the courtroom, Marilyn squeezed my shoulder. "You did it," she said. "Yes," I whispered, "but something tells me this isn't the end." Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of rain. I looked up at the darkening sky and thought of the storm still coming, the reckoning between a mother and a son, between love and consequence. And deep inside, I knew that no matter what happened next, I would face it. Not as a victim, not as a savior, but as the woman who finally learned to choose herself. 6 months had passed since the trial. The headlines had faded, the gossip had moved on, but the echoes of that courtroom still lived somewhere deep inside me. Rick had been sentenced to 12 years in prison for fraud and forgery, with the possibility of early release after 4. The day I heard the verdict, I didn't cry. I just felt an overwhelming stillness, like the ocean right before a storm. Now, the storm was over, or at least, that was what I kept telling myself. San Diego had become home. My small apartment by the sea was no longer a hiding place. It was mine, truly mine. Every corner held a piece of my new life. The embroidery I sold at the weekend market, the framed photo of my mother on the table, the plants that grew wild and unbothered on the balcony. For the first time, the silence around me wasn't emptiness. It was peace. One evening, Marilyn came over with a bottle of wine. She looked tired but satisfied, the kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting too many good fights. "I have an idea," she said, pouring us both a glass. "Oh no," I teased. "Your ideas usually involve a lot of paperwork." She smiled. "This one's different. I've been working with a group of women in the city, women who've been financially abused by their husbands, sons, or brothers. They need help, Helen. Legal help, emotional help. I think we could start something together." "Something?" I asked, though part of me already knew where she was going. "A foundation," she said. "A place where women can rebuild their lives. You'd be perfect for it. You know what it's like to lose everything and start again." I looked at her, speechless. The thought of turning my pain into purpose felt both terrifying and freeing. For so long, my story had been a scar. Maybe it could become something else. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the women who sat quietly at family dinners, pretending everything was fine while dying inside. Women who handed over their paychecks, their savings, their identities, all in the name of love. The next morning, I told Marilyn I was in. We called it New Dawn Foundation. The name came from something Marilyn once told me on a sleepless night after Rick's arrest. Every sunrise is proof that endings aren't final. Starting wasn't easy. We worked from my apartment at first, 2 women with laptops and too much coffee, but word spread quickly. Women started showing up, some with bruises, others with bank statements they didn't understand, all with stories that mirrored mine in different ways. There was Clara, whose husband had emptied her retirement account. There was Joyce, a 70-year-old woman whose son convinced her to take out a second mortgage. There was even a young woman named Mia, only 22, already caught in a pattern of giving and apologizing. Each story felt like a reflection of a life I could have lived if I hadn't run. I taught them what I'd learned the hard way: how to say no, how to open their own bank accounts, how to stand in front of a mirror and see someone worth saving. Marilyn handled the legal work. I handled the heart work. Together, we built something that mattered. A year later, New Dawn had an office downtown. Nothing fancy, just a few rooms, bright walls, and a big window that caught the morning light. On the wall, we hung a tapestry I'd embroidered myself, a phoenix rising in shades of red and gold. Beneath it, the words, "Start again." At our first public event, I stood in front of 50 women. My hands shook as I adjusted the microphone. I wasn't used to speaking to crowds. For most of my life, I had been invisible, the woman behind the man, the mother behind the son. "My name is Helen Morales," I began. My voice quivered, but I didn't stop. For 68 years, I thought love meant giving until there was nothing left. My husband controlled the money. My son controlled the guilt. I let them both because I was afraid of what it would mean to stop. Then one day, I realized I was still alive, and that was enough reason to begin again. The room was silent for a moment, then filled with applause. I felt something break open in my chest, not pain this time, but release. After the event, a woman approached me. She was about my age, with gray hair and kind eyes. "You don't remember me, do you?" she asked. I frowned. "Should I?" "I'm Christine Allen," she said. "I was married to Edward before you." "Atitid Salve." The air seemed to leave the room for a moment. I had heard of her only in fragments. "The crazy ex," Edward used to say. The one he claimed was obsessed with money. We sat down together, 2 ghosts from the same past. She told me her story, how Edward had isolated her from her family, taken her savings, and left her with nothing. Her voice trembled when she said, "When I saw your name in the news after the trial, I realized he did the same to you. I needed to meet you." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Then I reached across the table and took her hand. "He can't hurt either of us anymore," I said. Christine smiled through tears. "No, but he left us both with something, the courage to never let it happen again." That night after she left, I wrote in my journal, "Pain shared is pain divided." Over the next few months, Christine joined the foundation as a volunteer. Her background in accounting helped us teach women how to manage their finances. It felt poetic, the ex-wife of my abuser helping me undo his legacy. Life moved forward quietly. Amanda and the kids were rebuilding too. They had moved to a small town in Oregon. Luke was learning to play guitar, and Mary had taken up painting. We spoke often, always careful not to mention Rick. The wounds were still too fresh. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if he hated me, or if he had finally begun to understand. But those thoughts didn't hold me hostage anymore. They drifted in and out, like the tide. One evening, as I was closing up the office, Marilyn walked in holding a letter. "It's from the prison," she said softly. "It's from him." I stared at the envelope. My name was written in handwriting I hadn't seen in years, shaky but familiar. For a long moment, I couldn't move. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Part of me wants to throw it away. Another part wants to know what he has to say." Marilyn nodded. "You don't have to decide tonight. It's dead." After she left, I sat alone in the quiet office, the letter resting on the desk beside the faint glow of the phoenix tapestry. Outside, the last light of day slipped beneath the horizon, painting the sky in gold and crimson. I picked up the envelope, ran my fingers over the paper, and exhaled. Then I turned off the light. The letter sat on my desk for 3 days before I opened it. Each morning, I picked it up, read the return address, State Correctional Facility, Texas, and set it back down. My hands would tremble, not from fear exactly, but from the weight of everything that envelope represented. On the 4th morning, I made myself a cup of coffee, sat by the window overlooking the sea, and finally tore it open. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, like the man who wrote it was fighting himself with every word. "Mom," it began. "It feels strange to write that word now. I think I lost the right to use it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I'm only writing because therapy here has forced me to look at things I never wanted to see. I used to believe that power made me safe. I thought control was love. I see now that all I ever did was repeat what I learned from Dad. I turned into him without realizing it. I'm sorry you had to pay for both of us. I don't expect a response. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be someone better, even if it's too late for you to care. Rick." By the time I finished reading, the ink had blurred in a few spots. Maybe his tears. Maybe mine. I wasn't sure. For the rest of the morning, I carried the letter around like a fragile object. Every time I set it down, it called me back. His words were so different from the man who had once stood in my kitchen, shouting, demanding, blaming. They were raw, stripped of excuses. That afternoon, I called Marilyn. She came over within an hour, her lawyer instincts on standby as always. I handed her the letter without a word. She read it carefully, then exhaled. "Do you believe him?" "I don't know," I said. "He's always been good with words. Even as a kid, he could twist an apology into a promise I wanted to hear." "But?" she asked gently. "But something about this feels different." Marilyn studied me for a moment. "You don't have to respond, you know. Sometimes silence is the only honest answer. Ain't it?" I nodded, though my heart disagreed. Silence was something I had lived in for decades. Maybe it was time to speak again. That night, I lay awake, listening to the waves crash against the rocks below. In the dark, I thought about Rick as a little boy, the way he used to fall asleep, with his hand curled around my finger, afraid of thunderstorms. The same storms that now seemed to follow him everywhere. By dawn, I had made my decision. I wasn't ready to forgive him, but I couldn't ignore him either. I sat down at my small kitchen table and began to write. "Rick, I got your letter. I don't know if I believe every word, but I believe you're trying. That's something. I can't forget what happened, and I'm not sure forgiveness is the right word for what I feel, but I'm proud of you for facing yourself. That's more than most people ever do. My life now is quiet and good. I've built something meaningful. I work with women who've been through what I went through, and I find peace in helping them. I hope you find peace too, wherever you are. Maybe one day, when we've both done enough healing, we can talk not as who we were, but as who we're trying to become. Helen." I mailed it the next day. I didn't expect a reply. Maybe that was why, when one came 2 months later, I almost didn't open it. His second letter was shorter. "Mom, thank you for writing back. Your words meant more than you know. I'm in a rehabilitation program now. We plant trees in the prison yard. The guards say it keeps us grounded. It's funny, I used to hate the dirt. Now it feels like the only honest thing I touch all day. I think a lot about those afternoons when you used to garden behind the house. I never told you, but I liked watching you. You looked peaceful there. I don't know if I'll ever make it up to you, but I'll keep trying, even if all I can do is plant one good thing before I go." "Rick," I cried quietly when I read that. Not because I forgave him, but because for the first time in years, I felt a thread connecting us again, thin, fragile, but real. The months that followed were slower, softer. I kept running the foundation, meeting women every day whose stories mirrored my own. Some days, their pain was too much to hold. Other days, I saw hope flicker in their eyes, and it gave me strength. Marilyn teased me once, saying I had turned into a local celebrity. "You're the face of New Dawn now," she said with a smile. "People come to these meetings just to hear you talk." "I'm not a symbol," I told her. "I'm just someone who finally stopped being afraid." In truth, I still had moments of fear. Sometimes I dreamed of Rick showing up at my door. Angry again, his old self returned. Other nights, I dreamed of him as a child, running toward me with open arms. Both versions of him lived in my heart, the boy I loved and the man I had to let go. One afternoon, I received a call from Detective Grant. Her voice was warmer than I remembered. "Mrs. Morales, I wanted you to hear it from me. Your son has been accepted into a work release program. He'll start next month." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked. "He'll be allowed to work outside the prison during the day under supervision. It's a sign of good behavior." I gripped the edge of my desk. "So he's changing?" "I have live remanded." "It appears so," she said. He's been consistent, no incidents, no complaints. He even mentors new inmates now. After the call, I sat for a long time staring at the waves. The thought of Rick outside the prison walls filled me with conflicting feelings: pride, fear, disbelief. People can change, yes, but they can also pretend. I wasn't sure which version of him this was. That evening, I called Amanda. We hadn't spoken about Rick in months. When I told her the news, she was quiet. "Do you think he's different?" she asked finally. "I think he's trying," I said. She sighed. "The kids still ask about him sometimes. Luke wants to know if he can send him a letter. Indin resident. Maybe that would be good for both of them," I said softly. "But only if you feel ready." Amanda paused. "Maybe I am." After we hung up, I went out to the balcony again. The air was cool, the sky painted in orange and pink. I thought of Rick planting trees somewhere behind barbed wire, his hands covered in dirt, his mind perhaps a little freer than before. I didn't know if I would ever see him again, or if I even wanted to. But I knew one thing. For the first time in decades, the future didn't scare me. Still, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a quiet unease crept in. I knew life had a way of circling back, of testing what we thought we'd already learned. And when the next test came, whatever shape it took, I wasn't sure whether my heart would be ready. Summer arrived in San Diego early that year, the kind of season where mornings already smelled like sunlight and salt. The sea was calm, the air warm, and the world around me felt softer somehow, as if life itself had exhaled. A year had passed since Rick's first letter. In that time, New Dawn Foundation had grown beyond anything Marilyn or I had imagined. We had an office, volunteers, and a network of women who called each other sisters. Every Friday, our small team gathered for coffee and laughter before the heavy work of the day began. Pain was still present in every story we heard, but it no longer scared me. Pain, I had learned, was proof that we had survived. One morning, while sorting donations, I received a call from Detective Olivia Grant. Her voice was professional but kind, as always. "Mrs. Morales, I wanted to let you know personally, your son is being transferred to a semi-open facility next month. It's part of his rehabilitation process. He'll be allowed to work during the day, under supervision." I froze, staring at the sunlight spilling across my desk. "Where?" "San Diego," she said softly. "There's a reforestation project near your neighborhood. We thought you should know before it becomes public." For a long moment, I said nothing. I could hear the ocean through the open window, the faint laughter of children down the street. Life kept moving, unaware that my heart had just stumbled. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "Is he doing well?" "He's made progress," she replied. "No incidents, no violations. He's working hard. Honestly, Mrs. Morales, it seems like he's changing." After the call ended, I sat in silence. I didn't know what to feel: pride, fear, hope, maybe all of it at once. That night, I told Marilyn. She listened quietly, then asked, "Do you want to see him?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me does. Another part is terrified." Marilyn poured me a glass of wine and said, "You don't owe him forgiveness, Helen. But if you're curious, if you need closure, that's different." In Fortysade, her words echoed in my mind for days. A few weeks later, I took a walk by the park where the reforestation project had begun. From a distance, I saw a group of men in gray uniforms planting saplings. Their hands moved carefully, pressing new life into the ground. Among them was a familiar figure, thinner now, hair cut short, movements slower, more deliberate. Rick. I didn't approach him. I just watched. He worked quietly, focused, occasionally speaking to a guard or another worker. There was no arrogance, no sharp edge in his posture. For the first time, he looked like a man carrying his own weight instead of placing it on others. When I turned to leave, the wind picked up, brushing the trees. It carried a memory: his laughter as a child, chasing kites across the yard. The ache that followed was gentle this time, almost tender. A week later, a letter arrived at New Dawn. "Mom, I saw you at the park the other day. You didn't think I noticed, but I did. I didn't call out because I wanted to respect your space, but seeing you there meant something. I've been working hard here. The soil helps, it's honest. It gives back only what you put into it. I'm learning that people are the same way. I can't undo what I did, but I can start planting something better. I hope you believe that. Rick. I read the letter 3 times before setting it down. Then, for the first time in years, I smiled when I thought of my son. 2 months later, New Dawn hosted its biggest event yet, a workshop on rebuilding financial independence for women over 50. The community center was full, laughter mixing with nervous energy. I stood at the front of the room, microphone in hand, looking out at rows of faces, women from all walks of life, each carrying her own invisible battles. "Good afternoon," I began. "My name is Helen Morales, and I'm 70 years old. For most of my life I thought strength meant sacrifice. I thought love meant giving until there was nothing left of me. It took losing everything, my money, my family, my pride, to realize that strength sometimes means saying no." The room was silent. I could feel their hearts leaning closer. "I lost my husband to control," I continued. "I lost my son to greed. But I found myself in the wreckage. And if I can, you can too." Applause filled the room, but it wasn't loud or wild. It was steady, like the heartbeat of something shared. After the session ended, women came to hug me, to thank me, to whisper pieces of their own stories. Each one reminded me why I had survived, not to forget, but to guide. Later that evening, I went home, exhausted but full. The apartment glowed with the orange light of sunset. On the balcony, my plants had grown wild vines stretching across the railings, small blossoms swaying in the wind. Life, unapologetically alive. As I stood there, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unfamiliar number. "It's Rick. I wanted to thank you for the tools, the book, the encouragement. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say that I'm proud of you. You built something beautiful." I stared at the screen for a long moment, my heart heavy but peaceful. Then I replied simply, "I'm proud of you too, Rick. Keep planting." When I set the phone down, I realized my hands weren't trembling anymore. The sea outside was calm, the sky streaked with colors that looked like healing. I thought about the years behind me, the fear, the silence, the leaving, the rebuilding. It all led here, to this quiet evening, to this version of me that finally belonged to herself. I whispered softly, "It's never too late." Because it wasn't. Not for me, not for Rick, not for anyone who chooses to stop surviving and start living. If you've ever felt trapped by love, by guilt, by fear, I want you to remember Helen's story. You are never too old, too broken, or too late to begin again. If this story touched you, leave a comment telling us where you're listening from or how old you were when you decided to take your life back. And if you believe in second chances, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, because there will always be more stories like this, stories about strength, forgiveness, and the courage to start over.